In the early spring of 2007, a small rural town in northern Oregon awoke to the kind of tragedy that would define its history. A teacher, Ms. Eleanor Hayes, and 13 of her middle school students boarded a yellow school bus for what should have been an ordinary day, a field trip to a local geological park just 30 miles away. But by nightfall, neither the bus nor the people aboard had returned. What followed was one of the most exhaustive search efforts in the state's history. Hundreds of volunteers, drones, helicopters, and divers combing through dense forests, rugged cliffs, and riverbeds. Yet, no sign of the bus was ever found. As months turned into years, theories began to grow, from accidental detours into hidden ravines, to elaborate abductions, even supernatural speculation. Families held vigils every year on the anniversary of the disappearance, clinging to hope that someone, somewhere, might have seen something. Then, 11 years later, in the summer of 2018, a local hiker stumbled upon something protruding from the shallows of a rocky river deep down the valley. What rescuers pulled from that site would rewrite every assumption, every timeline, and every haunting question surrounding the disappearance of Ms. Hayes and her students. This is the story of how one community's grief turned into a mystery that refused to stay buried, and how a discovery beneath the cold, shifting waters finally revealed what the valley had been hiding all along. March 22, 2007, began like any other Thursday in the small Oregon town of Maple Hollow, population just under 4,000. The morning was crisp, sunlight catching on the damp pavement as children hurried across the schoolyard, backpacks bouncing behind them. It was supposed to be a day away from classrooms and textbooks. A geology field trip to the Ridgway Valley Natural Reserve, led by Ms. Eleanor Hayes, a well-liked science teacher who taught at Maple Hollow Middle School for nearly 15 years. The students were a mixed group of 7th and 8th graders, 13 in total. They were handpicked for their interest in science and their good behavior records. The plan was simple: leave the school at 8:30 a.m., arrive at the reserve by 10, spend the day studying rock layers and river formations, then return by 4 p.m. Parents waved from the parking lot as the bus rumbled away. Several took photos, grainy images that, years later, would become heartbreaking relics. In one picture, Ms. Hayes is smiling beside the bus door, clipboard in hand. A student makes a silly face behind her. It was the last confirmed photo ever taken of the group. The bus driver that day was Peter Lawson, a retired Navy mechanic known for his punctuality. The vehicle, bus number 56, was well maintained and had passed its routine inspection just 2 weeks earlier. The route was familiar, mostly highway, with a narrow detour down a forest road that led to the reserve's entrance. By 9:30 a.m., the bus was seen on County Road 8, passing a gas station security camera. That footage, time-stamped and later analyzed by investigators, became the last verifiable record of its existence. The vehicle never reached Ridgway Valley. When 4 p.m. came and went, the school secretary began making calls. At first, parents assumed there'd been a delay, traffic, maybe a flat tire, or an extended lesson. But by 6:30 p.m., unease turned into panic. By 8 o'clock, local law enforcement was mobilized. Sheriff Alan Pruitt, a seasoned officer with decades in the county, coordinated the initial search. Officers traced every possible route, checking ditches, turnoffs, and roadside shoulders. The reserve reported that no school bus had arrived that day. By midnight, roadblocks were set up, helicopters dispatched with thermal imaging, and volunteers gathered at the community center. The official search radius expanded from 30 miles to 120. But despite the intense effort, no debris, tire marks, or clues were found. The bus had seemingly vanished between two known points, less than a half-hour apart. Within days, the story made regional headlines. Bus of 14 missing without a trace, one headline read. National outlets soon followed. Reporters flooded Maple Hollow, broadcasting from the school parking lot, interviewing distraught parents, speculating about everything from landslides to criminal abduction. What made the case so haunting was its lack of evidence. Even in rugged country, It was unheard of for a large yellow bus to disappear entirely. Search dogs detected faint scents along a section of Old Creek Road, which veered toward a steep descent into the Drywood Valley, an area notorious for flash floods and unstable terrain. But no physical trace appeared, not a torn scrap of metal, not a shoe, not even tire imprints. As weeks turned into months, the search was scaled back. Investigators cataloged dozens of theories: a wrong turn, a sinkhole, a submerged bridge collapse, a hijacking. But without evidence, every path led to speculation. By summer's end, the tragedy had carved deep fractures through Maple Hollow. The school closed temporarily, families relocated. Ms. Hayes's home remained untouched, her mailbox still receiving letters and homework from students who refused to believe she was gone. Every year after, on March 22nd, candles were lit along the school fence line. 13 names of children and one teacher, read aloud by parents who had never stopped waiting. And somewhere beyond the valley, the river kept moving, swallowing and reshaping everything in its path. What no one knew then was that the same waters that had defined the town's landscape would, more than a decade later, expose its deepest secret. The disappearance of Ms. Hayes and her 13 students quickly grew from a local crisis into a state-level emergency. For the first 2 weeks, Maple Hollow transformed into a command hub. The town's modest fire station overflowed with volunteers, news crews, and federal agents. Maps covered the walls, each marked with red and blue circles representing search zones. Helicopters scanned ravines and ridgelines daily. Divers were deployed to nearby rivers, and K-9 units combed through forest trails. The Oregon State Patrol even brought in specialized sonar equipment to survey water bodies, every pond, lake, and slow-moving creek within 50 miles. But nothing surfaced. Families clung to the hope that the bus had taken shelter somewhere, perhaps stranded after a mechanical failure or cut off by a landslide. After all, spring in Oregon often meant unpredictable weather. But by day 6, that hope had begun to fade. The media turned Maple Hollow into a spectacle. Reporters swarmed the local diner, broadcasting live updates as search efforts intensified. Interviews with former students of Ms. Hayes painted her as deeply dedicated, the kind of teacher who organized weekend science hikes and turned lessons into adventures. That portrait made the tragedy feel all the more impossible. By the 10th day, search leaders realized something chilling. The bus had left almost no footprint at all. Tire marks that should have been visible after the last gas station sighting were missing. The asphalt stretch that led into Ridgeway Valley showed no skid marks or debris. Even the digital highway cameras, few as they were, revealed no sign of the vehicle past County Road 8. Then came the theories. Some believed the bus might have plunged into one of the deep sinkholes that dotted the valley, natural caverns formed by centuries of erosion. Others insisted it had been swept into the river after a storm surge, buried beneath layers of rock and silt. But the valley's main river, the Harrowbend, was shallow that season. Investigators reasoned that a 20-ton school bus couldn't simply vanish there. Desperation began to twist the narrative. Psychics called offering their visions. Conspiracy forums claimed the children had been abducted by a cult operating in the mountains. Some even connected it to earlier unsolved cases in the region. But for every new idea, there were no facts to support it. Behind the scenes, law enforcement quietly began reviewing personal connections, the driver's record, Ms. Hayes's background, the families involved. They found nothing suspicious. Peter Lawson's driving history was spotless. Ms. Hayes had no enemies, no debts, no scandals. Every student was accounted for that morning by witnesses. It was, by all measures, a routine school day that simply ended in silence. As April turned to May, the federal agencies withdrew. Funding dried up. What remained was a town haunted by unanswered questions. Parents refused to let go. They organized independent searches, sometimes risking their own safety by venturing deep into unstable canyons or hiking old mining trails. One father, David Ralston, continued searching every summer for nearly a decade. "It's like the earth swallowed them," he once said during an interview in 2013. But things don't just disappear. Not 14 people. At the Maple Hollow Middle School, a memorial garden was built where the bus once parked that morning. Small plaques with the children's names sat beneath a wooden archway. Every March 22nd, families gathered, leaving flowers, photos, and folded letters. Over time, new students would join the vigils, hearing the story as both legend and warning, a reminder of how fragile ordinary days can be. By 2012, the case was considered cold. Files were boxed, photographs archived. Yet, Sheriff Pruitt, long since retired, never stopped revisiting the maps. He kept one pinned in his home office, a circle drawn around the Drywood Valley River, annotated with a note, "Too dangerous to search fully." He believed that section of the valley, known for its sharp drops and rapid currents, might hold the answers. But access was nearly impossible without specialized gear. The terrain was unstable, the rocks jagged, the water treacherous. Every rescue team that attempted to navigate it had been forced to turn back. The community tried to move on. New families arrived, new students filled the classrooms, but the story never left Maple Hollow. It was told like a ghost tale whispered at dusk, the day the bus disappeared. And so, for 11 long years, the river flowed quietly below the cliffs, concealing its secret beneath layers of rock, silt, and shifting current, until one summer morning, when a hiker's curiosity led to a discovery that would bring Maple Hollow's long nightmare rushing back to the surface. In the months after the search was scaled back, the Maple Hollow investigation shifted from the rivers and forests to the archives and evidence rooms. The local sheriff's department, once filled with search maps and muddy boots, now became a quiet center for paperwork, interviews, and speculation. Detective Sarah Holbrook, who took over the case from retiring Sheriff Pruitt in late 2008, was determined to find something that everyone else had missed. She reviewed every report, re-examined every witness statement, and compared every piece of information collected in those frantic first days. She believed that the answer had to be hidden in the details. The first lead came from a delivery truck driver named Mark Densley, who claimed he had seen a yellow school bus parked on an unpaved service road near Harrowbend Valley around 10:15 a.m. the morning of the disappearance. At first, investigators dismissed it. The area was remote, and the route didn't connect to Ridgway Reserve. But when Densley described the bus as empty, with its door slightly open, detectives took notice. A search team was sent to the site. They found tire marks, but later determined they were from logging vehicles. Still, the report lingered in the file, one of those frustrating fragments that felt like it almost meant something. Another tip came months later, from a fisherman who reported hearing what he thought was a car horn echoing through the valley during a heavy rainstorm on the day of the disappearance. Investigators tried to pinpoint the sound's origin using flood records and topographic maps, but the valley's acoustics were deceptive. Nothing came of it. By 2010, the case files had grown into several thick binders, full of tips, false sightings, and interviews with supposed witnesses. Each new piece of information seemed to lead back to the same dead end. Detective Holbrook did, however, notice one troubling pattern. Several other vehicles had gone missing along the northern routes of the valley over the years. Smaller cars, hikers' trucks, even a delivery van. Some were later recovered near collapsed bridges or deep embankments. The terrain there was unpredictable, narrow turns bordered by cliffs, with crumbling guardrails and blind corners. Could the bus have taken a wrong turn? Could a mechanical failure have sent it plunging into an area that was simply too deep or dangerous to reach? She requested geological surveys from 2007 and found that parts of the Drywood Valley floor had been altered by seasonal landslides. In several spots, new rock layers had shifted over what were once shallow gullies. If the bus had fallen there, it might have been buried by the next heavy storm within hours. The problem was manpower. Reopening the search meant funding heavy equipment, dredging permits, and diverse train for unstable waters, all things the county no longer had. By 2011, The case budget was practically gone. That same year, Holbrook received an unexpected letter from one of Ms. Hayes's former colleagues, Mr. Paul Ritchie, another science teacher who had left the district after the tragedy. He told her that Ms. Hayes had been deeply fascinated by the valley's geological shifts. She had once spoken about showing her students how the valley's river carves through the oldest rock layers. That might have meant she had planned to take the class down closer to the water than the official itinerary suggested. If true, it would explain why the bus may have deviated from its route, perhaps to a less-known access road that paralleled the river. Holbrook's team checked aerial photographs taken just weeks after the disappearance. In one image, faint tire tracks could be seen veering off the main road, leading toward a steep drop into the valley. But the photo resolution was too low to confirm anything. She ordered a drone survey of that area, but by then, more than 4 years had passed. The land had changed. Vegetation had grown thick, and floodwaters had carved new paths through the soil. Whatever might have been visible in 2007 was long gone. Still, Holbrook couldn't let it rest. "It's not that the bus vanished," she said in a 2012 interview, "it's that we stopped looking in the right places." Unfortunately, by 2013, her department was reassigned to newer cases. The files went into storage, the search records labeled unsolved. Holbrook transferred out of Maple Hollow soon after, leaving behind a mystery that felt colder with every passing year. Then, in the summer of 2018, a jogger exploring a section of the Harrow Bend River noticed something strange glinting beneath the water, a metallic curve that looked out of place among the gray rocks. It was just visible at low tide, partially wedged between boulders. He took a photo and reported it to the county office, assuming it was an old car part washed down by the current. That image would reach the sheriff's desk within 24 hours. And when investigators compared it to the archived bus records, they realized that Maple Hollow's long nightmare might finally have a face. The discovery came almost by accident. On July 19, 2018, a local hiker named Evan Mitchell, 34, was trekking along the Harrow Bend River Trail, a rarely used path that followed the lower edge of the Drywood Valley. The summer had been unusually dry, and the water level had dropped several feet, exposing portions of the rocky riverbed that hadn't been visible in years. Evan wasn't searching for anything. He was just documenting changes in the terrain for a personal photography project. Around midday, while resting near a bend in the river, he noticed something odd sticking out from the water, a curved piece of rusted metal with streaks of faded yellow paint. At first, he assumed it was a piece of old farm machinery or a discarded oil drum. But as he waded closer, he realized it was larger than that, much larger. When he reached the edge of the water and wiped away a layer of mud, a shape began to emerge, a window frame. Within hours, county authorities had cordoned off the area. Sheriff Nancy Lowell, who had taken office only 2 years earlier, arrived on site alongside forensic teams and river engineers. The yellow paint and structure of the frame were unmistakable. It matched the design of bus number 56, the same vehicle that had vanished with Ms. Hayes and her 13 students 11 years earlier. The next morning, recovery crews began the painstaking process of excavating the wreckage. The bus was wedged deep between rocks, partially buried under silt and compacted gravel. Its roof was crushed inward, and the back half had been completely folded under the weight of river debris. Over time, the valley's current had concealed it beneath several natural landslides, turning the vehicle into part of the landscape itself. Divers found fragments of school supplies, notebooks, a few rusted lunchboxes, and what looked like a field guide to local rock formations. All had been sealed in sediment, eerily preserved by the cold water. Inside the bus, investigators confirmed the presence of human remains, later identified through DNA testing as Ms. Hayes, the driver Peter Lawson, and all 13 students. The discovery sent a wave of heartbreak through Maple Hollow. For 11 years, hope and uncertainty had sustained the families. Now, they had answers, but no comfort. The forensic reconstruction revealed a grim but simple explanation. The bus had likely taken a wrong turn down a deteriorating service road near the ridge, the same unpaved stretch noted years earlier in Detective Holbrook's files. That road ended abruptly at a steep drop, where the soil was unstable. At some point, possibly during a rainstorm, the bus had slid off the edge and tumbled nearly 40 feet into the Rocky River channel below. The impact had been devastating. The force was enough to bend the frame and break several windows instantly. From there, the river's natural flow, combined with multiple landslides over subsequent seasons, had buried the bus deeper each year, making it invisible even to aerial searches. The official report classified it as a tragic accident, no foul play, no sabotage. But among the residents of Maple Hollow, emotions were mixed. Relief clashed with grief. After all the theories, the rumors, and the conspiracies, the truth was both ordinary and unbearable. One parent described it best during a televised interview. "We built monsters in our minds to explain what happened. But in the end, it was the land itself that took them." When the bus was finally lifted from the water, crowds lined the valley road in silence. The sight of the rusted yellow frame, dripping with river mud, felt surreal, like watching time itself surface after a long sleep. Local historians documented every detail, ensuring the recovery was preserved for future records. The community decided that the bus would not be restored or displayed. Instead, after the forensic examination, it was sealed and buried at the town's memorial garden, the same site where candles had been lit every year since 2007. On the evening of August 12, 2018, a memorial service was held at Maple Hollow Middle School. 13 white roses were placed beside Ms. Hayes's photograph, and the town's church bells rang 14 times, once for each life lost. For the first time in over a decade, Maple Hollow slept without waiting for answers. The mystery that had consumed the town was finally over, but it left behind something quieter and heavier than fear, the weight of knowing that sometimes tragedies don't hide dark secrets at all. Sometimes they are simply lost to nature, and only time can uncover them. Even after the official report closed the case, the people of Maple Hollow couldn't let it rest. The recovery of the bus provided closure, but it also unearthed new questions, quiet, lingering doubts that no amount of evidence could completely silence. For one, many locals wondered how a vehicle of that size could have gone unnoticed for so long, even in such rugged terrain. The Harrowbend River wasn't a hidden location. Hikers, anglers, and environmental surveyors had passed through that valley for years. How had no one seen even a fragment of the wreckage? Geologists later explained that the valley's conditions made it possible. Heavy spring rains in 2007 had triggered multiple landslides, sending tons of rock cascading into the river. Those natural movements created what experts called a temporary burial event, essentially sealing the bus beneath newly shifted earth. Over the years, moss, sediment, and debris covered every trace of metal until the structure blended perfectly with the landscape. Still, others remained skeptical. Some residents recalled hearing a large crash or rumble on the afternoon of the disappearance, sounds they dismissed at the time as thunder. A few swore that road maintenance crews had reported seeing construction barriers removed near Old Creek Road the day before, raising questions about whether human negligence had played a role. But by the time of the 2018 investigation, those records were too incomplete to confirm. Then there were the families. For them, closure was complicated. The discovery brought answers, but also finality, an end to years of hoping, searching, imagining that maybe, just maybe, their children had survived somewhere. Several parents, like David Ralston, who had led countless volunteer searches, struggled to accept the findings. "We prayed for answers," he told a reporter. "But I didn't think finding the bus would hurt worse than not knowing." The town responded in the only way it knew how, with remembrance. A new monument was erected beside the memorial garden, a bronze plaque engraved with the names of all 14 victims, along with the words, "Gone from our sight, but never from our valley." Each year since 2019, Maple Hollow has held a commemorative walk from the middle school to the river overlook, a silent procession that follows the same road Ms. Hayes and her students once took. There are no speeches, no music, just the sound of footsteps and the steady whisper of the wind. Over time, the story became a kind of collective memory, one told not as a mystery, but as a lesson in humility. It reminded the town that even in a world of satellites and GPS tracking, there are still places where nature is stronger than human certainty. Detective Sarah Holbrook, who had left Maple Hollow years before, returned for the 2018 memorial. Standing before the crowd, she spoke softly. "We always think closure will erase pain. But sometimes, closure just teaches us how deep it really goes." Her words resonated with the families. They weren't angry anymore, just tired. 4 years, they had searched the land, the rivers, and themselves for explanations. Now they finally had one, and it wasn't sinister or complex. It was human, an accident, a wrong turn, and the cruel persistence of time and terrain. By 2020, the story of the Maple Hollow bus was part of state history. Documentaries were made, articles published, and the town began seeing visitors, people drawn by curiosity and empathy. But locals handled it quietly, never sensationalizing what had happened. The river, after all, had already done the storytelling. The Harrowbend continues to run through the valley, carving its slow path through the rocks. Each year, after the spring rains, pieces of the landscape shift, small reminders that the earth is always moving, always changing, just as it did on that day in 2007. And somewhere beneath the surface, in the sediment and the echoes of the current, the memory of that yellow bus remains, a testament to how even the simplest journeys can become the deepest mysteries. For Maple Hollow, it wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about preserving the truth, honoring those lost, and never forgetting how fragile the line is between the known and the unknown. The story of Ms. Hayes and her 13 students isn't just a tragedy. It's a portrait of how time, nature, and human emotion intertwine in ways we rarely understand. For 11 years, the people of Maple Hollow carried a question that defined them. They searched rivers, hiked canyons, and prayed for a miracle that never came. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't arrive with the drama of a revelation. It came quietly, like the steady current of the Harrowbend River, reminding everyone that some answers aren't meant to shock, they're meant to heal. The discovery of bus number 56 didn't just solve a mystery. It reconnected a town with its past. It showed that behind every headline, there are real people, real stories, and real grief. What happened to Ms. Hayes and her students wasn't about superstition or conspiracy. It was about nature's indifference, how one wrong turn, one patch of unstable ground, can change the lives of so many forever. Today, Maple Hollow stands not as a place haunted by loss, but as a symbol of remembrance and resilience. The memorial garden remains open year-round, and visitors often leave stones, notes, or classroom pencils in tribute, small reminders that those who teach and those who learn never truly disappear. In the end, the river gave back what it had taken, not to reopen wounds, but to let them finally close. And that's what makes this story endure, not the disappearance, but the discovery, not the fear, but the peace that followed.